My mother called on a Thursday morning to tell me they would not be coming to my wedding. She said it the way she said difficult things, gently, with a layer of reasoning already prepared, as though the reasoning would make the thing itself easier to receive. She said Kendra had set her date for the same day, and that the family needed to come together for her, and that she hoped I would understand. There were 12 people on that call's group thread. Aunts, cousins, my father, silent. I read every name on the list. I said, I understand. Then I made a different phone call entirely. I need to tell you about the phone call I made after I hung up with my mother. I called my property manager in Tuscany. Her name is Julia and she has managed the villa for 3 years, and she answers her phone regardless of the hour, because that is the kind of professional she is, and because I have learned, in building my business and my life, to surround myself with people who are exactly that kind of professional. I told her I needed the villa for the last weekend in June. She said, the full property. I said yes. She said she would arrange everything. I said thank you and ended the call, and sat in my office in Nashville with my coffee going cold and the morning light coming through the east windows, and I felt something settle into place, with the quiet finality of a decision that was always going to be made and had simply been waiting for the right moment to arrive. My name is Amber. I am 37 years old. I own a logistics technology company that I founded 8 years ago from a shared workspace with one employee, which was me, and a concept that most people I pitched it to in the first year described as interesting but premature. It is no longer premature. We have 214 employees across 4 offices and a client list that I am proud of, and a revenue figure I do not discuss at family dinners, which I attend less frequently than I once did for reasons that this story will make apparent. The villa in Tuscany is not something my family knows about. I bought it 4 years ago, as a combination of investment and personal indulgence, the first truly personal indulgence I had allowed myself in a decade of building something. $8 million for a restored farmhouse on 11 acres outside Siena, with a view of the valley that made the purchase feel, every time I stood at the terrace railing, like the most reasonable decision I had ever made. Julia manages the property. It generates rental income, one roll back into maintenance. It is mine in the complete sense of the word, and it is private in the complete sense of the word, and nobody in my family has ever been invited to see it. I had planned a different wedding. The original plan was a venue 40 minutes from my parents' home in Georgia, a place I had chosen partially for its beauty and partially because its proximity made attendance easy for the people I had hoped would be there. My fiancé Thomas had agreed to the location without pressure. He was from Vermont and had no particular geographic stake in the choice, and he had said from the beginning, wherever you want, it's your day too. I had chosen Georgia because I was still, at 37 years old, arranging decisions around the hope that my family would show up for them. I had been arranging decisions around that hope for 37 years. My mother is a woman who loves her children in a way that is real and also arranged. The love is genuine. The arrangement is also genuine. What she had built, over the course of raising 2 daughters, was a household in which one daughter's needs were immediate and attended to, and the other daughter's needs were manageable and therefore managed by the daughter herself. This was not a policy she had written. It was a habit she had formed so early and so automatically that she had long since stopped seeing it as a choice. Kendra is 4 years younger than me. She is the daughter my parents organized themselves around from the beginning, and she had learned, as children learn these things, that the organizing would continue as long as she needed it to. She was not malicious. She was simply practiced at being centered. The date conflict was not an accident. I want to be precise about this because it would be easy to attribute it to coincidence or poor communication, and I do not believe it was either. Kendra had known my date for 6 weeks before she announced hers. I had told my mother in March, and my mother had mentioned it at Easter dinner, and Kendra had been at that dinner and had said, "That's such a beautiful time of year for a wedding." 6 weeks later she announced her date. Same Saturday. Same month. Different venue, an hour away. My mother's call came 4 days after Kendra's announcement. She said the family needed to come together. She said Kendra needed them. She said she hoped I would understand. She said it like I had always said it. I understand. Of course. I understand. I set the phone down. Then I called Julia. The pattern had a beginning I could locate if I tried. I was 9 years old. Kendra was 5. My school had a spring concert that I had been preparing for since February. I had a small solo, 12 bars, nothing remarkable except that it was mine, and I had practiced it until I knew it in my sleep. The concert was on a Friday evening. My parents had confirmed they were coming. My father had written it in the calendar on the kitchen wall in his specific block lettering that meant a thing was settled. On Friday afternoon, Kendra fell off her bicycle and scraped her knee badly enough to need 2 bandages and a significant amount of parental attention. The injury was real. The bandages were necessary. What was not necessary was the conclusion my parents reached, which was that the scrape meant they could not attend the concert. My mother said she didn't want to leave Kendra upset. My father said there would be other concerts. There were other concerts. They came to some of them. But I had understood something at 9 years old that I spent the next 28 years finding new evidence for. I was the daughter who could handle things. The one who would be fine. The one whose events and needs and disappointments existed on a different ledger, one that could be balanced later, or partially, or not at all, because I would find a way to absorb the shortfall and nobody would have to feel bad about it. I was good at absorbing. I had practiced it since I was 9. At 16 I was accepted to a summer business program at a university 3 states away. Competitive. Selective. The kind of opportunity that required a parent to attend an intake weekend at the start of the session. My father had registered to come. 2 weeks before the intake weekend, Kendra had what my mother described as a difficult period, social trouble at school, the specific category of adolescent distress that reorganized the household around itself immediately and thoroughly. My father stayed home. I drove to the intake weekend with a family friend who had offered when she heard the situation, and who was kind enough not to mention it again afterward. That summer program was where I first understood that I was capable of building something. It was also where I learned that I was going to have to build it without a particular kind of support that some people had and I did not. I built anyway. The company took 8 years from concept to the size it is now. During those 8 years my parents were supportive in the ambient way, asking how things were going, saying they were proud when the news was good enough to be unavoidable, attending the opening of my first proper office with the mild enthusiasm of people who understood that their daughter had done something without fully understanding what she had done. Kendra had a difficult job transition during those years, and then a difficult relationship, and then a difficult apartment situation, and the household continued to organize itself accordingly. I had stopped expecting the household to organize itself around me. That had been a reasonable adaptation for a long time. What it had not done was stop the part of me that wanted it, which was smaller than it had once been and more honest about its own size, but present still, underneath the company, and the property in Tuscany, and the coffee going cold in my Nashville office. Thomas knew about the pattern. I had told him in the careful, edited way I had told most people, enough to explain the dynamics without sounding like a person assembling a case. He had listened and then he had said, And you still arranged the venue in Georgia? I said yes. He said, because you're still hoping. I said yes. He did not say anything further, which was the correct response. He had known this moment was a possibility before I did. When I told him about Kendra's announcement and my mother's call, he sat across from me in the kitchen, and he waited for me to get to the part where I had decided what to do. He did not offer solutions. He did not manage my response. He simply waited, because he knew me well enough to know I was already deciding. I told him about the call to Julia. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 11 acres. I said yes. He said, show me the photographs again. I showed him. He looked at the valley view for a long time. Then he looked at me with the expression he wore when he had assessed a situation and found it exactly right. He said, let's get married in Tuscany. Part 3. The invitations went out on a Monday. Not the original invitations, those had been designed for the Georgia venue, ivory cardstock with a simple serif font, elegant and understated and entirely appropriate for the kind of wedding I had believed I was planning. The new invitations were different. Julia had connected me with a Florentine stationer she had worked with before, and the result was something I could not have designed for myself: handmade paper, a small watercolor detail of the Tuscan Valley, the kind of object that communicated where you were going before you read a single word. I sent them to everyone on my original guest list. I did not call my mother first. I did not explain the change, or ask for input, or manage anyone's response in advance. I sent the invitations and I waited, and I felt, in the waiting, the particular lightness of someone who has stopped arranging themselves around a reaction that may or may not arrive. My Aunt Frances called 3 days after the invitations landed. Frances is my mother's older sister, and she has watched our family from the position of someone adjacent to it for 40 years, with the clear-eyed affection of a woman who loves her family and is not required to live inside its specific logic. She called and she said, Amber, is this real? I said yes. She said, Tuscany. I said yes. She said, your villa. I said yes. There was a pause and then she said, I'll be there. Said it with the particular warmth of someone who has been waiting for a long time to stand clearly in one direction. She was the first. The responses came in over the following 2 weeks. Cousins I had grown up with. Thomas's family, who responded immediately and with a collective enthusiasm that required multiple text threads to contain. Friends from the company's early years who had been on the original list and who responded to the new invitation with messages that said things like, obviously yes, and we were coming to Georgia, but Tuscany, Amber, seriously. My father's brother and his wife, who called and left a voicemail that was warm and simple and ended with, we always thought you'd do something like this. Something like this. 61 people confirmed for Tuscany. My mother called on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks after the invitations went out. She had received hers. She had seen the responses accumulating through the family group threads she monitored. She called with the controlled composure she used when a situation had moved beyond the shape she had anticipated, and she was recalibrating in real time. She said, I don't understand why you changed everything without talking to us. I said, I found a better venue. She said, you know we can't come to Italy. Kendra's wedding is the same day. I said, I know. She said, people are choosing, Amber. Do you understand what you're doing to this family? I sat with that for a moment. What I was doing to this family. The language arranged me as the disruption. The change of venue as the act that had introduced conflict into a situation that had previously been harmonious. My mother was not being deliberately unfair. She had simply spent so many years in the habit of centering one daughter's needs and managing the other daughter's adaptability that she could not see, from inside the habit, how it looked from the outside. I said, I found a venue I love and I sent invitations to the people I love. That's what I did. She said, your sister is devastated. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. She said, is that all you're going to say? I said, I think so, yes. The call ended shortly after. Not with anger on my part. Not with a speech, or a list of accumulated grievances, or any of the things I had rehearsed in my head over years and never delivered. I simply said what was true and stopped when I had said it, and let the silence that followed be what it was. Something had concluded in me during that call. Not the love. I want to be precise about this. The love for my parents was real and would remain real regardless of what happened in June, or what had happened for the previous 37 years. What had concluded was the waiting. The specific and exhausting posture of a person who has been hoping, for decades, that the people she loves will eventually look at her the way she needs to be seen, and has kept adjusting herself in the meantime to make that looking easier for them. I was done adjusting. Thomas was in the kitchen when I came back from the call. He looked at my face and did not ask how it went. He poured me a glass of wine and handed it to me and said, Julia confirmed the caterer today. I said, good. He said, the olive grove near the East Terrace is where I want to stand when you walk toward me. I looked at him. I said, then that's where we'll be. Part 4. The last weekend in June arrived the way significant days arrive, quietly, without the fanfare the anticipation suggests, just the ordinary morning light, and the sound of the valley below the terrace, and the particular smell of Tuscany in early summer that I had been breathing for 4 years on visits and had never stopped finding remarkable. Julia had arranged everything with the precision I had come to rely on. Long tables under the olive trees with linen the color of the hills. Flowers from the property's own garden, nothing formal, just gathered and placed in the way things are placed when the setting is beautiful enough that decoration is simply an extension of what already exists. A local quartet that played during the ceremony and shifted into something warmer afterward when the tables filled and the evening began. 61 people stood in the olive grove when Thomas and I got married. I want to tell you what that felt like, because it was not what I had spent 37 years imagining when I imagined my wedding. I had imagined my parents in the front row. I had imagined my mother's expression and my father's eyes and the specific feeling of being seen fully by the people who were supposed to have been seeing me all along. I had carried that image for years without examining whether it was something I was building toward or something I was waiting to be given. What I felt in that olive grove was different from the image and better than it. Frances was in the front row. She wore a yellow dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and she cried from the moment I came into view, which I saw from 20 meters away, and which made me smile before I reached Thomas. His parents were beside her, his mother holding a handkerchief she had brought knowing she would need it. Behind them were cousins and friends and his brother, and a colleague from the company's first year, who had flown from Singapore, because she said there was no version of this she was missing. Thomas stood at the edge of the olive grove with his hands clasped and his face doing the specific thing it did, when he was feeling something he did not have sufficient words for. I had learned to read that expression in 3 years of loving him, and it was one of my favorite things about him, the way emotion outpaced his vocabulary, and he simply let it show. I walked toward him, and I was not thinking about who was missing. I was thinking about who was there. The reception went until midnight. Long Italian dinner, the kind that expands through courses and conversation, and the gradual warmth of people who are happy to be together in a beautiful place. Frances gave a toast that was 3 minutes long and entirely without sentimentality except at the end, when she said, I have watched this woman build everything she has from the ground up, and I have never once seen her ask for permission to do it." Then she raised her glass and said, "About time someone stood up and told her she was right to." The table responded in a way that I sat inside for a long moment before lifting my own glass. My parents attended Kendra's wedding. I heard this through my cousin Daryl, who was at mine, who had heard it from his mother. He mentioned it briefly and without drama, because there was nothing dramatic left in it. It was simply what had happened. My parents had gone to the wedding they chose to go to. 14 people attended Kendra's ceremony, I was told, down significantly from her original guest list, which had been built largely from the extended family that had chosen Tuscany instead. I did not feel satisfaction about that. I want to be honest about this because it would be easy to describe the outcome as a kind of justice, and it was not quite that. It was simply consequence. Natural, unorchestrated, the kind that follows when a situation is allowed to reveal itself without anyone managing the revelation. People had been given 2 invitations and had made their choices, and the choices told a story that nobody had to interpret or explain. Kendra called me 6 weeks after the weddings. The call was brief and uncomfortable, and more honest than any conversation we had managed in years. She said she thought the date conflict had been a mistake. I said I appreciated her saying so. She said she wished things had been different. I said I did too, in the specific way that was true, not that I wished the wedding had been different, but that I wished the 37 years before it had been different, which was a longer and more complicated wish, and not one either of us was ready to unpack on a phone call. We said goodbye and it was genuine, and I set the phone down and went back to what I was doing, which was reviewing a proposal for the company's next expansion. My parents called a month after that. Together, on speaker, which they did when they had agreed on something in advance and wanted to present a unified position. My father said they were sorry they had missed it. He said Tuscany sounded extraordinary. He said he hoped there would be a time they could visit. I said I hoped so too. My mother said, "We know it wasn't fair, Amber." I sat with that for a moment. 4 words carrying the weight of 37 years of a pattern they had never named before. Not a full accounting. Not the detailed and specific acknowledgement that some part of me would have written if I were writing the script. Just 4 words, plainly delivered, and the particular effort that plain delivery requires from someone who does not speak plainly as a habit. I said, "I know you do. The villa is still mine." Thomas and I have been back twice since the wedding, once in the autumn when the hills change color, and once in January when the valley is quiet and cold and entirely different from its summer self, and still extraordinary. Julia keeps everything in order. The olive grove looks the same as it did on the last weekend in June, which is the thing about olive groves. They are old enough to have seen many things, and unhurried enough to remain exactly themselves. There is a photograph from the wedding that I have framed in our Nashville hallway. Thomas and I at the terrace railing just before the ceremony, the valley behind us, the light doing what Tuscan light does in late afternoon. We are not looking at the camera. We are looking at each other in the way people look at each other when they are about to do something significant, and are entirely certain about it. Frances took the photograph. She sent it to me with a message that said only, "This is the one." She was right. It was the one. I look at it sometimes when I am passing through the hallway on an ordinary Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, moving toward the day's work. I look at it for a few seconds and I feel the particular quality of something built on correct foundations, not perfect, never without difficulty, but solid in the ways that count and honest about the ways it isn't. Thomas appears from the kitchen most mornings and says something ordinary about the day ahead, and I respond with something equally ordinary, and we go about the work of our life together with the easy, unsentimental rhythm of two people who have chosen each other clearly and continue to choose each other daily without requiring it to be a performance.